Welcome to British Focus, where we bring you the latest political scandals, controversies, and power struggles shaping the United Kingdom. If you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on the unfolding chaos in Westminster. Keir Starmer is facing a brutal reckoning. His leadership is crumbling before our very eyes, as his own MPs turn against him in what is shaping up to be one of the most damaging rebellions in Labour's modern history. And make no mistake, this is not just a handful of disgruntled backbenchers. This is a full-scale revolt, with a majority of Labour MPs openly defying their own leader. The issue at the heart of this political implosion? Welfare cuts. The very thing Labour was built to defend, the support system for the most vulnerable in society, is now being slashed under Starmer's watch. His grand plan to cut welfare spending has blown up in his face. This is a man who was supposed to stand for the working class, for those in need, for the people who have nowhere else to turn. And yet, here we are, with Starmer leading a government that is actively pushing policies that will make life harder for millions of struggling Brits. The mastermind behind this debacle? Kendall, the Secretary for Work and Pensions. She's been parading this plan around as an effort to make welfare more sustainable. But let's be real, we all know what that actually means. Cuts. Ruthless cuts. Cuts that tear away at the safety net so many rely on. Cuts that will push families, pensioners, and disabled individuals deeper into hardship. And here's the kicker, she isn't even trying to sugarcoat it. She has openly admitted that these cuts will be ruthless. Yes, you heard that right. Ruthless. That's not a word you expect to hear from a Labour minister discussing welfare policy. That's the kind of thing we'd expect from the Tories, isn't it? But no. This is Labour. The so-called party of the people is now turning its back on those who need help the most. And the reaction? Absolute fury. Labour MPs are in uproar. This isn't just discomfort or mild concern, this is full-blown panic. They know this is political suicide. They know that voters will be outraged. They know that they're about to face a backlash so fierce it could cost them their seats. Some MPs have described the plan as an attack on society's most vulnerable, while others are already bracing themselves for a voter rebellion. And honestly, what did they expect? Did they really think the British public would just sit back and accept this? That people would celebrate having their benefits cut? That struggling families would be grateful to see their financial support slashed? It's madness. And here's the thing, these cuts haven't even been implemented yet. This outrage? This chaos? This rebellion? It's all happening just from the announcement. Can you imagine what will happen when people actually start losing their benefits? When single mothers can't afford to feed their children? When disabled individuals can't afford the care they need? When the elderly are forced to choose between heating their homes and buying food? It's going to be absolute carnage. This is turning into a slow-motion car crash, and Starmer? He's just standing there, watching it all unfold, silent as the grave. Not a word. Not a single attempt to calm his party. Not a single move to reassure the public. He's watching his government implode and seems completely frozen. And if you think this is bad, just wait. Because this is only the beginning. Keir Starmer has managed to alienate his own MPs, anger the voters, and shatter Labour's credibility as the party that defends the welfare state, all in one spectacularly disastrous move. It's almost impressive, really. It takes real political incompetence to pull off this level of self-destruction. But perhaps the most terrifying part? He's not done yet. Because if this is the reaction before the cuts have even been implemented, what's coming next will make this look like a minor inconvenience. People are furious now. Just wait until they feel the full impact. And here's the real question. Is this the moment that breaks Keir Starmer? Because make no mistake, this rebellion is a turning point. The cracks in his leadership are becoming impossible to ignore. The very foundation of Labour's identity, the promise to protect those who need it most, has been ripped apart under his watch. His MPs are losing faith. His voters are losing trust. His entire political future is hanging by a thread. And let's not forget, this is just one crisis. Starmer is already drowning in scandals, controversies, and infighting. His immigration policy is in shambles. His economic strategy is falling apart. His relationship with key industries is deteriorating by the day. If this welfare catastrophe is the final straw, we may be witnessing the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer's leadership. What do you think? Is Starmer's downfall inevitable? Can he survive this internal revolt? Or is this the moment Labour tears itself apart from the inside? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to British Focus, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the chaos unfolding in British politics. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Keir Starmer's immigration policy is turning into an absolute disaster, and quite frankly, it's painful to watch. You would think, after all the blunders Labour has made in recent months, that they'd approach something as politically volatile as immigration with a bit more competence. But no, Starmer and his team have managed to create a policy so disastrous that it has managed to enrage both his own party and the opposition at the same time. Let's be clear, this was supposed to be Starmer's big moment. A chance to shake off Labour's reputation for being weak on immigration and prove to voters that his party could be trusted to take control of the borders. Instead, what do we get? A law so deeply unpopular that 74 Labour MPs refuse to back it. Just let that sink in for a moment. 74 MPs from his own party. That's not just a handful of disgruntled backbenchers, that is a full-scale rebellion. It's a mutiny. If your own MPs don't believe in your immigration policy, why on earth should the British public? Then, of course, we have Diane Abbott, never one to mince her words, tearing into the bill. She's out there questioning whether the government is deliberately targeting desperate migrants, and let's be honest, she's not the only one asking that question. It's one thing to have the opposition attacking you, but when your own party members start accusing you of stigmatizing vulnerable people, you know you've got a problem. And speaking of opposition attacks, the Conservatives are absolutely loving this mess. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, wasted no time in mocking the proposal, dubbing it the Border Surrender Bill. Can you believe that? Starmer is out here trying to look tough on immigration, and the Tories are painting him as weak and spineless. It's almost impressive how he's managed to fail on both fronts. He's too soft for the right and too harsh for the left. That's what happens when you try to play both sides. You end up pleasing no one. And let's talk numbers, shall we? Because illegal crossings have gone up by 28% under this very government. So what exactly has Starmer achieved? He came into power promising to fix the immigration crisis, to bring order to the chaos at the borders. Instead, things have gotten worse. And yet, somehow, his own MPs can't even agree on whether his policy is too harsh or too lenient. Some Labour members are panicking that this bill effectively opens a backdoor to citizenship for illegal immigrants, while others are outraged that the government is criminalising people who are simply trying to flee desperate conditions. So, which is it? Is Starmer being too soft or too hard? The fact that nobody can tell speaks volumes about how catastrophically this entire thing has been handled. And let's not forget about Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, who has been wheeled out to do damage control. She's desperately trying to convince the public that this bill is about tackling smuggling gangs and stopping human traffickers. Sure, Yvette. Because smugglers are the ones who are going to be punished by this bill, right? Or is it more likely that desperate men, women, and children who have nowhere else to go will be the ones suffering? And here's where it gets even more absurd. One of the proposals within this bill includes 5-year prison sentences for small boat arrivals who refuse rescue. 5 years. Let that sink in. Does anyone actually believe that throwing desperate asylum seekers into prison will stop them from trying to reach the UK? People who are literally risking their lives in flimsy dinghies just for the chance at a better future. Labour MP Kim Johnson certainly doesn't think so. She's pointed out what should be painfully obvious. People don't cross the channel in small boats for fun. They do it because they have no other choice. If safer, legal routes existed, they wouldn't need to put their lives on the line. And yet, here we are, with Starmer pushing policies that don't actually solve anything. And if you thought Labour MPs were the only ones frustrated, think again. Because the Tories are laughing their heads off. This should have been a moment where Starmer outmaneuvered the Conservatives, where he proved to the British people that Labour could be trusted to handle immigration better than the Tories. Instead, he has handed them the perfect opportunity to attack him from all sides. Because let's not forget, Starmer's plan is being slammed from both ends of the spectrum. His own party thinks it's cruel. The Conservatives think it's weak. The public thinks it's a joke. And we haven't even touched on public perception yet. Because the British public is not easily fooled. People are genuinely concerned about immigration. They want a system that is fair, firm, and functional. But what they're getting is a policy that pleases no one, solves nothing, and creates even more division. People are asking legitimate questions. How is this bill supposed to work? Who exactly is it punishing? Will it actually reduce illegal crossings? Or will it just make life harder for people who are already suffering? And let's not forget, illegal crossings have only increased. Starmer has had all this time to come up with a workable solution, and yet his grand plan is already falling apart before it's even been implemented. Meanwhile, the Tories are licking their lips, waiting for the moment they can capitalize on Starmer's incompetence. They're already spinning the narrative that Starmer is failing to secure Britain's borders, that his policies are a shambles, that he isn't fit to lead. And honestly, can anyone argue with them at this point? Keir Starmer wanted to prove to Britain that he could be trusted on immigration. Instead, he's proven the exact opposite. He has alienated his own MPs, given the opposition a golden opportunity to attack him, and created a policy that doesn't seem to satisfy a single person. And this is just the beginning. Because if Labour MPs are already furious, if the Tories are already circling like vultures, if the public is already losing faith, then what happens next? Does Starmer double down? Does he backtrack? Does he ignore the outrage and push ahead anyway? Whatever he does, one thing is certain, he's running out of time. And if he doesn't get his act together, this could be the moment his entire leadership starts to unravel completely. Keir Starmer is quickly becoming the Prime Minister who manages to alienate everyone. If it wasn't enough that his own MPs are rebelling over welfare cuts and his immigration policy is in shambles, now he's found a brand new group of people to anger: farmers. And when farmers start driving their tractors into Westminster, you know the government has made a catastrophic miscalculation. Let's talk about this inheritance tax bombshell. From April 2026, any farm worth over £1 million will be hit with a 20% tax when passed down to the next generation. Now, to someone sitting in a London office, £1 million might sound like an enormous amount of money. But in the real world, in farming communities, it's a different story. These aren't billionaires hoarding cash. These are hard-working families who have spent generations building their livelihoods. Farms aren't just businesses, they are legacies, passed down through blood, sweat, and tears. And now, thanks to Starmer's government, those legacies are under threat. Tom Bradshaw, the president of the National Farmers Union, hasn't held back. He's called this policy a betrayal, and honestly, can you blame him? Farmers have already been struggling under rising costs, supply chain disruptions, and endless government red tape. Now they have to worry about losing their land to the taxman just because Labour thinks it's an easy cash grab. And the anger isn't just in rural England. Even Labour MPs are starting to realise what a disaster this is. They're pleading for tweaks to the policy, probably because they've finally figured out that angry farmers make for angry voters. This is a party that is supposed to understand the working class, and yet, they're the ones hammering Britain's oldest industry. And it's not just the farming community raising the alarm. Jeremy Clarkson, a man who has become something of an unexpected spokesperson for British agriculture, has warned that this tax will lead to the ethnic cleansing of the countryside. Now, that might sound dramatic, but his point is clear: Labour's policies are pushing traditional farming families out of their own land. And let's not pretend that this tax is going to hit the rich, because it won't. It's going to crush the small and medium-sized farms, the ones that don't have the resources to survive another financial burden. The big corporate agricultural firms? They'll be just fine. It's the family-run farms, the backbone of British food production, that will suffer. So, what happens when farms disappear? Well, it's pretty simple. We become even more dependent on imports. If British farms can't sustain themselves, who is going to grow our food? Do we really want to be at the mercy of foreign markets for something as fundamental as our food supply? And if Starmer thinks this is just a farming issue, he's in for a shock. Because food security is a national issue. If more farms are forced to sell up just to pay this ridiculous tax, what happens? Prices go up. Less local produce, more reliance on imports, and guess what? That means even more inflation. And speaking of economic disasters, let's talk about the absolute mess Labour is making of the economy. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is floundering. She's been in the job for months now. And what has she actually achieved? Nothing. In fact, she's being ripped apart by financial experts who are pointing out the obvious. Labour has no real plan for growth. They've had 14 years to come up with a strategy, and yet here we are, watching them scramble to patch holes in the economy with vague promises and last-minute meetings with bankers. And if that wasn't bad enough, let's talk about the steel industry, which is on the brink of collapse. Why? Because Donald Trump is threatening a 25% tariff on British steel exports to the US. Now, for those who might not know, the US is our second-largest steel export market after the EU. Last year alone, over 1 million tons of British steel were shipped to the States. So, what happens if those tariffs go into effect? We're looking at a potential £400 million hit to the industry. And what is Starmer doing about it? Absolutely nothing. It's as if he thinks that if he stays silent long enough, the problem will just magically disappear. Well, here's a reality check. It won't. This is a massive economic threat, and yet Starmer seems to be completely asleep at the wheel. The UK steel industry has been in decline for years. This could be the final nail in the coffin, and Labour is just sitting there watching it happen. If we lose our steel industry, we don't just lose jobs, we lose a vital strategic resource. Do we really want to be reliant on China and other foreign powers for our steel supply? Because that's where we're headed. And just when you thought Labour's incompetence couldn't get any worse, let's talk about how Starmer is ignoring the victims of IRA terrorism. Yes, you read that correctly. For months, the Docklands Victims Association has been trying to get a response from Starmer. They've sent letters. They've made appeals. They've done everything they can to get the Prime Minister's attention. And his response? Silence. This is a man who, before he was elected, promised to fight for them. He assured them that he would push for compensation from Libyan assets frozen in the UK, funds that should rightfully go to the victims of Gaddafi-backed IRA attacks. But now, he won't even acknowledge them. The DVA has called him out directly, stating that he has completely ignored their pleas since taking office. And honestly, how disgusting is that? These are people who survived bombings, who have endured decades of trauma, and the leader of this country can't even send them a response? But oh, don't worry, Labour has plenty of sympathy for them. Yes, because profound sympathy pays the bills, doesn't it? Sympathy doesn't bring justice. Sympathy doesn't replace lost loved ones. These people were promised action, and now they are being abandoned. So, let's sum it all up, shall we? Keir Starmer's government has managed to anger the farming community, threaten Britain's steel industry, enrage economic experts, and betray the victims of terrorism, all in a matter of months. That's not just bad governance, that's political suicide. And yet, Starmer and his team carry on as if nothing is happening. They seem to think they can just coast along, making vague promises, ignoring crises, and hoping the public doesn't notice. Well, guess what? The public has noticed. The farmers, the steelworkers, the terror victims, the working-class communities struggling under Labour's broken promises, they've all noticed. And if Starmer doesn't wake up soon, his leadership is going to crash and burn faster than anyone imagined.